Up next, we have a talk by Dr. Dhaval, talking on DIY and making in low socioeconomic communities. Thanks.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dhaval. I work at University of Queensland. I'm an academic there. Um, when Matthew asked me to give a talk, I was thinking about what I should be talking about. And one of the things that I wanted to sort of acknowledge was to sort of so I've been going through this in the last 3 years. I've been working on a project where we're trying to sort of understand DIY and making practices amongst low socioeconomic communities. And it's a project that was funded by the ARC. So that's another common thing between what Matthew is doing and what I'm doing. And then I thought, well, it might be a good idea for me to actually sort of wrap up the studies that I've done in a single talk and sort of give an overview of what I've studied so far in different sort of spaces and makerspaces that I've visited. So that's going to be the talk for me today. So I thought I'd just give a very quick overview of what my overall project aims to do. So it's an ARC DECRA project, and the aim is to foster DIY and making practices in low socioeconomic communities. Now, obviously, the larger project has quite different types of phases and stages. But I'm only going to talk about the first phase, which is to basically develop a set of understandings around different makerspaces that cater to or that involve people from low socioeconomic communities. The larger goal for us to obviously then use those learnings to then sort of involve people from low socioeconomic communities to have a co-design session with us where we can actually design new tools and new ideas for them to actually improve upon their existing making and DIY practices. So that's the overall goal, that we wanted to design a set of tools and technologies through which making and DIY practices can be enhanced and improved, right? So that's the overall goal, but I'm only going to talk about the 4 different spaces that I had the pleasure to study. Right, so just a very quick overview before we go on to that part, and I think today we've probably seen enough of this type of information about what makerspaces are. So traditional makerspaces are about sort of supporting digital fabrication, allowing sort of hardware and software hacking, art and craft type of making. They enable sort of open innovation. They enable learning and education, and obviously creative collaboration. From an end user's perspective, it adds a level of empowerment. It sort of enables people to participate in projects that normally they would not be able to participate. And it actually makes the design of technology more democratic. Democratic in a sense that it's the end user who's actually making those things and not the manufacturers, right? So it sort of makes things more democratic from that perspective. There's also a bit of a shift that is happening within makerspace culture, where initially it was all about hobbyists, people who actually were interested in making technology, people who had actually the know-how of what sort of things that what kind of new technologies they can design. But then we are seeing more entrepreneurial makerspaces. This is where people are coming up with new ideas, new startups, and actually trying to sort of earn their living through the activities that they do at the makerspaces. However, the overall criticism so far has been that it only sort of involves people with white-collar jobs or people who actually have the capacity or capability to learn and do work with those technologies, and does not involve people who are, say, marginalized or vulnerable, right? So that's where my research comes in, and that's where I'm sort of trying to understand what are the existing practices of people who are from low socioeconomic background in order to sort of make things and do DIY activities, right? So I'm obviously not the first one to do it, because there's been a lot of research done where non-traditional makers have been actually studied, right? So feminist makerspaces where a group of women get together to sort of run sort of hackerspaces and code new softwares and things like that. There's been studies on sort of how older adults would actually go on about making. involvement of refugees, involvement of people with disability in making, but also involving a larger community into the sort of making process through community hackathons. So my work so far has been sort of well aligned with this type of atypical makers. So I'm not going to talk about engineers or technologists who are actually making things. I'm going to talk about people who are generally marginalized in terms of DIY and making. Right? So I'm going to talk about 4 different spaces that I've studied so far in the last 2 to 3 years. Now, on the top left, you see a men's shed. Is there anybody who doesn't know what men's shed is? Okay, so everybody knows. So that's good. That's a men's shed. That's e-waste recycling center, and you might be actually talking about the same e-waste recycling center there. This is actually a woodworking center. So it's not a men's shed, but it sort of, it does similar things like men's shed, but it involves all genders and, or people from all parts of the all parts of the world. And the last one is the feminist makerspace, where sort of women would get together and do art and craft type of things. They would do crocheting, they would do knitting, they would do card making, and so on. Right? So these are the 4 different spaces that I've studied. We actually sort of spent quite a lot of hours in those spaces. We interviewed individuals. We sort of even sort of did a participatory engagement where I would actually make something myself in order to better understand how sort of, how woodworking is done, or how an e-waste our product from an e-waste recycling is actually made. So through those kind of involvement, we actually sort of learned quite a lot about how these spaces function. Just to sort of tell you a bit more about these spaces, so the men's shed was, and just to sort of tell you a bit more about the kind of diversity that we've had in terms of demography. So in the men's shed, we had people who were generally retired, but they also welcomed people who were not retired. So I could actually become a member and sort of start making things, or help others who are making things. For e-waste recycling center, they would generally involve people who work for the dole. So you might be aware of that program where you do not have an employment. You can ask the government for welfare support, and in order to avail that welfare support, you are asked to spend some time in this kind of spaces. So what you see here is that there are sort of quite young, young adults who are probably just finishing their universities or their schools, and they are there who are sort of opening up different electronic waste, and eventually the center would actually sort of encourage them into actually becoming a maker. So first by training them to just understand and sort of open up a computer or a printer, then to actually involve them into making new IT and electronic products. This space was, the woodworking space was more of a space that enabled people who had some sort of disability to come into the space and then do woodworking. So they would do more of repair and refurbishment rather than actually making new furniture, because they were aware of the fact that the participants or the members who are part of their community, they can't actually do a lot of physical work. So repair and refurbishment would be the best way to actually sort of enable them and support them. And the last space, which is the art and craft group of women, this is again, this was a space where older women above 65 or retired women would come in, and then they would sort of start making things with others. There are tables with specific interests. So in one table you will see that there are women who are interested in card making. There are other spaces where they are making more crocheting and knitting and so on. So based on interest, participants can actually move around different tables. So this was the overall sort of setup for us. And based on our study, we found 4 different sort of types of practices that we explored. So these are, obviously, we've seen that there's an open innovation, there is learning, there is sort of resource sharing, and those kind of values that are already existing in makerspace cultures. These are some of the new practices, or sort of things that we normally not see in the traditional makerspaces. So our findings were making to improve living. So this was one of the themes that we saw, that how our participants actually wanted to use their DIY and making skills in order to improve their current living conditions. Making as a care work, which was more about sort of helping the larger community. MetaMaking, which was actually about ensuring that your making processes are ongoing. So it's making about making. And the last theme was more about making as a therapy. So how some of our participants saw the therapeutic effects of being involved in DIY and making. Right, so I'll go through these themes one by one, and I have lots of examples through my fieldwork as well. Right, so it's probably one of the most obvious sort of findings, in a sense that we sort of engage with people who were generally considered from low socioeconomic background. So when they have DIY and making skills, they would actually try to improve their current situation, right? So that's probably one of the most sort of common theme that we saw across all of our participants. So I'm just going to talk about one particular participant, because we've seen multiple examples of how participants sort of use their DIY skills in their homes, in their everyday activities, in order to sort of make efficient and more pleasant changes. Right. So this is a participant called Joe, a pseudonym. He's 55 and he does not have a place to live. So his brother actually gave him a shed on his own property and asked him to sort of make it his own. So there was no insulation, nothing in it. And what he ended up doing was to sort of make a thermal mass heater. Right. So what you see on that image is that there are specialized bricks that he sort of researched about and created a thermal mass heater, where you can see some wooden sticks next to it. And in winter, he would sort of use those sticks to sort of make the heating for his shed, and then obviously in summer that won't be required. So this is where he actually used his permacultural sort of background, where he sort of enabled, or he ensured that he would sort of either repair or refurbish existing technology, or make use of the permaculture technologies to sort of ensure that he has the nice living, right? Then he had built his own underground cellar. So that was connected to his, not his, but he actually got it from the pit. So he connected that old fridge to the underground cellar, and he could then sort of freeze things. So obviously it won't freeze up to minus degrees, but at least 2 to 3 degrees, which is good enough to sustain food for a longer period. Now we recruited this participant through the e-waste recycling center. So he actually sort of was interested in making electronics as well. And what you see here is his own e-bike. So he doesn't have to rely on the public transport. So he actually made used battery packs that were actually given to him by the e-waste recycling center, and then attached to his bike, and then he can travel around. Right. So that's an entrance of his house, in a sense that it's just a shed, but he sort of ensured that he has the right kind of sort of technologies and facilities to have a nice living for himself. Another thing that I wanted to sort of talk about is that even though participants had not a lot of resources, they did have sort of a small space where they would actually sort of use it as a mini makerspace or a workshop type of thing, right? So this is actually a garage of one of the participants who actually lived in a social housing, but he actually had access to a small garage, and he sort of collected all the sort of used or thrown out items, and then made sure that he has his own sort of space where he can repair and make things. The next image is a similar type of example, where when you do not have the right type of finances, how you would end up making your own makerspace, in a way where you can actually practice making and repair. The second theme is about making as a care work. So this is a theme where we saw that participants treated their DIY and making activity as a way through which they can help the larger community, right? So this is where what you see here is a group of women getting together to make Christmas card for kids who are struggling with autism, right? So they would make these cards together in bunch and then give it to a charity, which will then eventually give those cards to those kids. These are knitted sort of blankets that would be given to people who actually need them. The example from Mentioned is quite similar as well, that they would refurbish or repair old cradle, as you can see in this image, and then sort of give it out to people who are actually in need for those kind of tools. What you see in the last image is a tool that physiotherapists use for kids who struggle with some sort of physical disability, and these are more like a platform through which kids learn to walk, right? So these are the tools. These are the sort of tools that Mentioned members would make to help the people who are in need. And sort of if the school wanted to, so this was actually meant for a special school, and if the school wanted to buy these things from outside, they would spend like $1,000, and these guys did it for $100 because it's just the cost for the wooden material, right? So they don't charge anything for labor. None of them charge anything for labor because they wanted to sort of actually help out to the larger community that they generally engage with. So this is the theme that we saw, making as a care work. Then MetaMaking. So this is a theme where we saw that making was seen as a tool to enable further and future making. So this was more prevalent in the EVS Recycling Center compared to the other spaces that we have studied. But as you can see, that the products that they were building were not the products that would be actually what you would call end product. These are actually the thing that you would make in order to make further things, right? So the battery packs that they've created, it will actually be used to charge, say, an e-bike or any other electronics that they are using. The 3D printers, which is again something that they made in-house using almost 90 to 95% electronic waste, would again actually be able to help making sort of components of different products that they are working on. Then you can see a homemade filament extruder. Again, a thing that they actually, when they recycle a lot of plastic, they use those plastic to make their own filament and then sort of repurpose them to make new things out of it. So you can see the 3D printed component of a 3D printer. So that's why it's MetaMaking, because it's sort of, they are making things in order to enable further making, right? So that's another theme that we saw. The last theme was more about making as a therapy. So, and this was again more relevant to people who were attending the craft-based Makerspace as well as the Mentioned. When we interviewed one of our participants, she said that she enjoyed coming to the art space, not only because she likes to do that, but it's also an outlet for her to be away from her hectic lifestyle. Because she was in a retirement age, she was looking after her ailing partner, and she also had caring duty for her sort of grandkids. So for her to have those 6 or 7 hours in a week's time was really, really pleasant and really sort of me time for them. And as you can see in the other image in the Mentioned, quite often older adults who are about 85, close to 90, they sort of generally become, physically less active. So in order for them to do something at the Mentioned, they would actually sort of create sessions where they would just sand some wooden objects, or they would just do very sort of lightweight activities through which their physical activities is sustained, but at the same time, the social environment that is given to them or through the spaces they are in, it actually helps them to sort of talk about things that they normally do not talk about when they are at home. So obviously there are multiple quotes and multiple evidences that we have seen throughout our research, but I'll stop at this point and just sort of do my final sort of conclusion at this point. So what we have seen and what we have sort of learned throughout the last 2 to 3 years is that making has actually become a tool to support resilience. So it's no longer just a hobby. It's no longer just something that you make to have fun with. It's actually something that you use to sort of cope against a harsh economic situation, or sort of how you can actually ensure that the environment is sustainable by sort of using and reusing and repairing, and sort of getting involved in e-waste recycling. So this is how Making actually also supports sustainability. And we also saw that Making enabled personal benefits as well as community benefits. So how Making sort of supported somebody to sort of make their own sort of thermal mass heater so that they can sort of be better prepared for harsh winter, versus how they can actually help the larger community which is in the surrounding area, and how they can sort of use those DIY and making skills in order to help people who are in need. Right, so this is what my research so far has taught me. And some acknowledgement: you obviously can't do things by yourself. I have 4 PhD students who've been helping me in this work, and lots of collaborators who sort of guided me through this process. So I thank them by closing this presentation. Thank you.